Welcome to HIA's Industry Economic Outlook. I'm Cath Hart, Executive Director of the Housing Industry Association in WA. Joining me today is WA's Housing Minister, Peter Tinley. Thanks for joining me, Minister.
Thanks, Cath. Pleasure to be here.
Minister, obviously the last 3 months have been truly unprecedented. From a government perspective, you've been trying to balance the economic needs and the health risks. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that, including what it's been like behind closed doors?
It's been quite intense at times, I must say. We came out of Christmas thinking it was going to be another good year for the McGowan government, and then we got whacked like everybody else with an event, a global event in the coronavirus. And the crisis management of the government has been exceptional, particularly from the Premier. And the reason being is because there's a singular focus on making sure that health advice has been centrally located and the decision making has been held a lot tighter. So going into the crisis, we were making decisions at Cabinet that a week before we thought were unthinkable, but the day after we announced them, they didn't go far enough. And so a lot of the time the government was coming to work every day trying to make the least worst decisions. Thankfully, I think we've led the nation in our response to the health crisis, which is an event that created the economic crisis that we find ourselves in. So that's been you'd rather it in other circumstances, but we're trying to make sure that we're using the opportunity to bring the state out of the economic challenge as fast and as hard as possible. For me, it's been a pleasure being in the housing portfolio, particularly because it's going to be and it's been at the centrepiece of the recovery, and we've been pushing very hard for it. Crisis management's always good and linear and easy to go into. Because, as you say, that's a very tightly held decision. Coming out of a crisis is a little bit more difficult, particularly when trying to get economic stimulus. I'm used to crisis. My previous professional life, as 25 years in the Army, has sort of conditioned me to be able to respond to these sorts of things very calmly and based on advice. And I've got to say, the advice from the industry particularly has been very well thought through and very consistent. It's been a pleasure.
We then saw the development of the $444 million housing package. Can you talk to us a little bit about the lead up to that?
Well, first thing that went into it was the advice from the industry. So we were getting early advice from the Housing Industry Association, your association, and the other peak bodies about the state of the industry. Now we know for the last 5 years the housing industry's been in a fairly down cycle and very tight. And so a lot of those businesses and the supply chain supporting them had to really be quite lean. Then we got whacked with coronavirus, and the Housing Industry Forecast Group last year identified a pretty healthy glide path out of it. We're heading back towards 20,000 new starts, and then nobody was prepared to predict what next year looks like that we've just entered. We got the advice early that the deal flow, particularly from your organisation, for the builders particularly, was always going to, as I say, fall off a cliff within 3 months or thereabouts. 120,000 people in construction-related activities, and I think from your own numbers you were talking about as much as a 40% unemployment hit, if you like. No government can stand by and watch that happen in one of its key sectors. So that was a pretty easy sort of a conversation after that. It was just how much and when.
But as part of that, traditionally these grants have been focused more on first homeowners. Can you talk to me a little bit about why this particular grant, the building bonus in WA, has been broadened out in terms of its eligibility?
One of the things we did early on was engage Treasury, and I've got to say the Treasurer in Ben Wyatt has been exceptional in the design of the grant scheme. He had from the outset the ambition to make it as broad as possible and applicable as possible, because we didn't want to end up narrow casting the response, if you like, the treatment, and there'd be too many winners or not too many winners and not enough and too many losers. So we decided, or he decided, that it would be best if we just made it as widely applicable. We knew the Commonwealth were working on one as well at the $25,000 level, and he worked as hard as he could, and I had used all of my relationships with the Commonwealth to try and influence how those conditions worked. Unfortunately, they didn't get where we got to in terms of a grant that was both had a fair length of time that was appropriate but applicable to a range of people. We know also, I might add, that the first homeowners in Western Australia rely largely on net migration as well. So that demographic of 25, 35-year-old, which typically makes up the first homeowners, they're in decline. And if we just targeted this at first homeowners, quite frankly, have a first homeowner grant and a discounted stamp, that wasn't going to carry the industry. We know we had to save 40-odd thousand jobs. You don't do that by just focusing on a narrow piece of the industry.
And the results have been absolutely extraordinary. We've seen a huge increase in display home traffic, leads and inquiries to builders. People say it's gone absolutely bananas. Has that been in line with what you expected, or has it surpassed expectations?
Well, this is the point I go back to when I started about coming out of a crisis is harder than going into it. What the market would do in response to any stimulus was always unpredictable, and that's very much the case here. We could not, and Treasury couldn't, put a number on the impact. We knew roughly what the demand was, again, through your advocacy about what the sort of demand sat and where it sat. So as of last Wednesday, I think, there was about 614 sales since the grant's announcement. 440 of those were land packages. So that's an incredible response. Exceeds anything in the past 52 weeks and the 52-week average over a recorded time. So some people were recording sales activity that was single digit per month to triple digit. So that speaks for itself. The real challenge now is bringing to book and supplying the demand through the construction phase, but also probably even more importantly, the finance phase.
So the important thing to note about all of these packages and schemes, though, is that they're actually all about protecting jobs.
There's two parts to the design of the stimulus package or industry support package. One is it's unashamedly focused at building contracts, like build the buildings, because we know that's where, in the design phase and the throughput of those, that's where the majority of jobs are. So $170 million will go to the grant. About $319 million of the $444 million is going directly to constructing or housing activity in the social housing. You have to do both. You can't do one without the other to make sure that we have an equitable approach to the spend. There's always more needed in social housing, so we didn't want to miss that opportunity. We estimate, Treasury estimates, about 1,700 jobs as a result of this package directly. We know that the multiplier effect of that is quite significant, and I won't get into that because it becomes elastic, but we'll wait for the industry to give us the feedback about what that looks like. But from early conversations, particularly with the larger builders, they're actually advertising for people.
One of the issues that members keep raising with me is around the timing for both of the schemes. With the federal home builder scheme, there's only 3 months from a contract to a commencement, whereas with the WA building bonus, that's got a 6-month window. Given that the West Australian Government will be administering the home builder scheme on behalf of the Commonwealth, is there an opportunity to align those timeframes?
So some good news there. The people might not be aware that under the National Partnership Agreement, the states from time to time agree to operate federal programs on behalf of the Commonwealth. That seemed quite logical with this one. The Office of State Revenue is running the grant scheme, our state-based scheme. The Treasurer, to his eternal credit, would not accept the fact that we were going to be asked to administer it, yet have no flexibility over it. The Treasurer has negotiated that if there are aspects outside the control of the purchaser for the commencement of the works, then Office of State Revenue has the capacity to extend up to the 6-month period. So it's a 3-month extension that is available should, on request, be needed. What we want to make sure is that this was always focused at construction contracts, and so any of those conditions around that prevent that through planning or through no fault of the purchaser, then there will be an extension opportunity.
So even with that 6-month time frame, with the massive spike in demand and obviously industry coming off a relatively low base over the past 5 years, there still will be some issues around local government approvals, finance approvals. Can you talk to me a little bit about those challenges?
Well, look, we identified 3 potential problems: supply of title land supply, title lots, finance, and the way the banks are approaching the grants, And thirdly, the approvals through local government. Now, some local governments, starting with that one first, will be more taxed than others, simply where the new construction is happening in our city. The Premier has written to every local government and urging them to be as expeditious as they can. The other point that I make to the local governments and my friend and colleague Rita Safiotti has made is that if you are having challenges as a local authority, give us early advice and we'll see what we can do to assist to get those approvals through your particular system. Some local governments, well, we know local governments, like any other agency, have a finite amount of resources. The in-tray fills up, it just takes time to clear it out, and it's not through lack of effort on their behalf. All we're saying to them is, if you're having trouble, sing out, and we'll see what we can do to assist. The other problem is potentially finance. I'm meeting with banks tomorrow to understand first what their concerns are about the grants and the conditionality of those grants in relation to accepting them as part of the financing package, and then also to impress upon them the need to do their part to the economic recovery of not just Western Australia but the country. They have a unique position in the fact that they have been under trading in their books around residential construction or residential parts of their loan book. So this is a unique opportunity to really look clear-eyed at the fact that the government, both the Commonwealth and the state, are very serious about this industry. They too need to play their part.
Is one of the issues for the banks around valuations, given that there's been such a low amount of activity in the established market over the past 3 months?
There is, I think there's that lag effect of market decline, again that 5 years of tight down cycle, but also their treatment of the grants is being discounted. You know, quite frankly, valuers work to the banks, and that's the thing that I want to have a conversation with the banks about as well, making sure that relationship is actually decoupled and focused on where the market is actually at and not a historical context.
The other thing you've touched on is the $319 million social housing economic recovery package. At the time, this was announced at the same time as the grants, and certainly the grants dominated the media, but I know that the social housing package is certainly something that's been close to your heart. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yes, surprisingly for the industry, those who are listening, that as the Housing Minister, the grants actually are not strictly my lane. I'm an advocate for it inside this building, but they're the domain of the Treasurer, and he's done a fantastic job in that area. But he's also acutely aware of the need for social housing, but the actual economic impact it has. So right now, as we're sitting here, Nigel Hindmarsh, the responsible senior public servant in the Department of Communities, is out there signing up contracts, running panels, organising the direct construction, so direct stimulus, the fastest way we can get jobs going on the trades, on the sites. We, from the $319 million, we'll be building about 250 new dwellings. But this goes on top of the $150 million we announced in December with the housing and homelessness package. That too will be delivering directly about 70 new builds in its own right, along with other crisis care accommodation. The other point to note with this is that we're spending some of that money, a large part of that money, on 1,500 refurbs. So we're going to take public housing stock, that about 1,500 of them, and then this is not paint and paper, this is real stripped back stuff. And so where I've asked the agency to focus is on those parts of our asset that are at end of life, that we were going to dispose of anyway. And what it does is, once we do a full refurbishment, that could be cladding, wiring, full internals, a whole lot of things going on. That'll do two things. It'll have trades and small to medium enterprises directly focused at it. It'll also then potentially, or will, turn around stock that we were going to get rid of into another 20 years worth of use. So there's great opportunities, and regionally we're going to be out there, there'll be about 3,800 houses will be touched by either new construction or maintenance or refurbishment through this program.
And that package has been specifically designed to really make sure that it's activating small and medium businesses as well, isn't it?
Particularly in the regions. We know they're hurting, and they hurt faster and harder than we do in the metro because of the supply of opportunity. So I was up in the Karratha in the Pilbara a few weeks ago to make sure that they understand that locally there. Same in Geraldton, and I just got back from down in Bunbury where we had the same sort of conversation, courtesy of the HIA, with some of your members about what are the challenges they have and how do they get access to these opportunities.
I couldn't really have a conversation with a representative of the WA government without asking about the hard border that's in place. Obviously, the Premier's been either, has received lots of brickbats and bouquets about that particular issue. I think in light of what's happening with Melbourne, though, some more people might be more supportive of that at this stage.
Well, it's ironic, though, that we haven't heard in the last week or two from those people who've been howling for the borders to be dropped, none less than Lisa Harvey. They are suddenly silent because they know what the potential problem is, and Victoria shines a light. Unfortunately, we feel very sad for them. And they had 73 new cases today, and trying to stop that community spread for a second time is deeply challenging. We're acutely aware as a government that nobody will thank us for walking back the restrictions. We've been very privileged here to be able to just keep lifting those restrictions. If we have to bring them back on, that will be a whack to the economy as much as it will be to the actual health crisis it creates. So the hard border is very much a feature of that now. And I can say, in the Premier's mind, he is very keen to open the border when and where it's possible to do it, and he won't do it until it is safe for Western Australians to do so. It does raise the wider issue. Net migration into Western Australia has all but stopped. In fact, it has stopped. So it also has an opportunity in my mind. There is still lots of business going on. 40% of the nation's export income comes from Western Australia via the resource sector and other sectors. And so what we need to do is make sure that we're using this as an opportunity on the East Coast to say, actually, if you want to have a bright future for you and your family, Western Australia's got it for you. So why don't you contemplate moving to Western Australia and take up residence here? You can even get a good building grant to start off life again. We want to attract good people here. And we want to retain them. The $20,000 homeowners grant here in home construction grant here in Western Australia is open to them. It's open to anybody. If I was sitting there in Melbourne at the moment, and I had skills or had the opportunity to work into the industries here in Western Australia, I'd be seriously contemplating the livability of this town and this state and the opportunities for them and their children very, very carefully. Western Australia has a future that is bright and something they can believe in.
So just in closing, Minister, I wondered if you could share with us what your top 3 priorities would be over the next 6 to 12 months.
Very simple. All top 3 are jobs, jobs, jobs. Everything I'm doing, I'm the Minister for Housing, Fisheries, Asian Engagement. Those 3 portfolios are deeply centred on making sure there are jobs for Western Australia, not just anyone's, but ones that are sustainable and enduring well beyond this. When this is all faded into memory, we want to make sure we've used the crisis to not only supercharge our own economy, but make sure we get a continuous growth as a result.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Minister, for joining me today. And on behalf of industry, I did want to convey our sincere thanks for all of your support and engagement with us during what's been a really, really challenging time.
Oh, thank you very much, Cath, for having me, and you've been a great support to me and my office with the information and advocacy. And we haven't always agreed, but that's the nature of advocacy, and I really do appreciate your support.
Thank you very much.